The war in Iran was meant to be a show of air power and advanced military hardware, but it quickly became another kind of conflict, with cheap drones and missiles neutralizing the US by punishing its allies and paralyzing energy flows. Nearly 7 weeks into the war, it's now clear this conflict is about energy, with oil and gas supplies the central theater of conflict. The thing is, we've been here before. COVID and the Ukraine war led to similar energy shocks. Yet here we are with fossil fuels once again the focal point of this energy crisis. In Asia countries like Sri Lanka are rationing fuel. The Philippines is on a 4-day work week, and India is cooking fires over wood because of a gas shortage. So why are we back here again?
So the situation is, if we want to put in a context, this crisis, as it things stand now, 2 oil crises and 1 gas crisis put all together, the single most important solution to this problem is opening up the Hormuz Strait, as it things stand now.
Well, correspondents Toni, Waterman and Roland join us as the battle over energy enters a critical phase. So we heard Fatih Birol from the IEA tell us the solution, but my question to the both of you is, why haven't we learned our lessons? We've had, 2 recent shocks, never mind the shocks from the 70s, and we are in the middle of the third one. Roland, let me start with you. Why are we here?
Well, no, I think the honest answer is that we have learned some lessons, but it's not been enough and it's not been even. I mean, Asia did learn one big lesson from the Russia-Ukraine shock, and that was dependence on imported fuel, which really became a natural vulnerability very quickly. But the region is still heavily exposed. Demand is huge. Alternatives take time to build up. And a lot of countries are actually stuck halfway between the old as well as the new system. I mean, as you well know, Asia remains the most exposed to the current disruption by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, because it sources its vast majority of its oil and gas from the Middle East. And that's why, as you mentioned, countries are now conserving fuel. India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, the list goes on. And Japan, South Korea also looking for alternative supplies and drawing on reserves where they can. Fatih Birol, the head of the International Energy Agency, has called this the greatest global energy security threat in the history of the world. Now, much more severe than the 70s oil crisis, the COVID pandemic, or the Russian invasion put together. But at the same time, I should mention, though, this is the first oil crisis in the world that we have solar panels, we have wind turbines, we have EVs, we have batteries, and these are inexpensive and widely available options.
Toni, so I'm wondering what the US situation is. I mean, I believe the Trump administration would be aware of the 70s shocks, would be aware of the tanker wars as well. So why is it where it is right now, where we see higher gasoline prices, we see inflation ticking up as well?
Well, I'm sure that some people within the Trump administration are aware of those events, but the truth is that this is not the 1970s or the 1980s anymore. This is a very different type of mentality among the leadership here in the United States. It is far more nationalistic. It is far more inward looking, and it's not necessarily concerned about how its actions impact others. The energy situation is also completely different from the 1970s. When there was that oil shock, the United States intentionally tried to diversify, but more so really tried to bring its production domestically. And, the U.S. at that time was importing about 5 to 6 million barrels of petroleum a day. It wasn't hugely reliant on oil from the Middle East, but it's even less dependent now. The U.S. is now a net energy exporter and has been a net energy exporter since 2019. So it produces more energy than it consumes. It's still importing certain crude for refining purposes, but it's mostly coming, that crude is mostly coming from Canada and Mexico. It is not coming from the Middle East. But this energy independence really gives the U.S. an incredible amount of freedom. It enhances its national security. It reduces its vulnerability to geopolitical shocks and dependence on frenemies, countries that are enemies but also friends of the United States because of this long-term energy dependence. And under certain leadership, this energy independence allows for decisions to be made without having to really take into account the impact military action could have on energy supplies to the United States.
I do want to ask you though, Toni. I mean, the US may be a net exporter now, but we also know its usage has risen to record levels. I talked about gasoline prices. I'm sure you're feeling it as well where you are. Roland mentioned some green energy, sources which have become maybe mainstay in some parts of the world, this part of the world anyway. So my question is, why didn't the US do both, become a net exporter and at the same time develop, green energy industries like solar, like batteries, and the way EVs, the way China has done?
Well, that had been the plan under previous administrations, Democrat and Republican. So you had former President George H.W. Bush, a Republican, who signed the Energy Policy Act back in 1992 to advance renewable energy incentives and electric vehicles. President Clinton's administration formed partnerships with utility companies for solar panels and wind farms to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, they also had these energy initiatives. And of course, Joe Biden, the most recent former U.S. president, prioritized the Inflation Reduction Act, which provided over $370 billion in incentives for solar, wind, and battery technology. President Trump is not a renewables kind of guy. He is a drill, baby, drill kind of guy. And he's been very pro fossil fuel. So on his very first day in office in his second term, he issued a number of executive orders that froze offshore wind permitting and mandated these new reviews for previously approved projects, which led to them, at least some of them, being canceled altogether. And then you also had the Big Beautiful Bill, which had the phasing out of renewable energy tax credits, both on the industrial but also on the residential side. It had the phasing out accelerated. So that meant money that was going to American consumers as a rebate on electric vehicles or putting solar panels on their roofs are disappearing or have already disappeared at an accelerated rate. And President Trump has really given no indication that he's going to reverse any of these changes to renewable energy sources or try to promote them in any way now that gas prices here in the United States have spiked to over $4 a gallon. And despite that being a major political pain point for him and the Republican Party heading into the November midterms.
Okay, so it sounds like it depends on who takes power, which administration takes power. Roland, I want to go back to your point about how Asia has been doing something in mid-transition, to use a phrase I believe that the industry uses as well. So clearly, the region is not ready. This transition continues to take place. But I'm wondering, will the war on Iran, provide greater incentive, or are we looking at it possibly playing out in more complicated ways?
I think outside of the US, much of the world is still trying to move away from fossil fuels to cleaner energy, but that transition is clearly incomplete. So I guess the question is, does the war speed that up or make it messier? I certainly think it will do both. I mean, in the short term, war makes countries more dependent on fossil fuel, not less. I mean, they will keep coal plants running. They'll pay up for LNG that are higher. They'll relax rules. They'll use whatever methods in the system. I mean, countries like Europe, Asia, they're already turning back on their coal plants, their gas and nuclear plants because of fears of supply disruptions. Japan, for one, is relaxing rules for a year to boost coal-fired power because the war has added uncertainty to its LNG imports. But At the same time, I should mention that it hasn't really derailed the use of renewables. Now, I recently attended the Asia-Pacific Maritime Conference in Singapore, where captains of industry tell me that the boat has already left the dock in terms of renewables and green alternatives. So the course has been set, but it is only a matter of time. Here's what Chris Chatterton, who is a maritime advisor for the Global Center for Green Fuels and Maritime Alliance, had to say.
Will only strengthen our resolve to decouple from fossil fuels, just to diversify. We're not suggesting that we should completely decouple, but diversifying so we can avoid these types of crises, that's the best way forward. And the best way to do that is to use clean fuels, which are already cheaper to produce than fossil fuels. So it's an easy decision to make.
But over the longer term, I mean, the same shock can actually strengthen that case for renewables and electrification. It's also been called the energy paradox. What I mean by this is that the high fossil fuel prices makes clean energy options more attractive strategically, but at the same time, the volatility and the financing costs can actually slow these projects down. So the war in some way will strain the clean energy sector too. I mean, it's already making supply chains for key items more expensive. Transformers, aluminium, copper wires, they're all facing their own bottlenecks now because of the disruption. So the chaos will actually make everything, whether you're building polluting energy infrastructure or clean ones, a little bit more harder and more expensive.
Toni, I want to ask you about President Trump's philosophy on energy. You mentioned this, drill baby drill. But I also want to play, what Kepler told Roland recently.
When you have a war in the Middle East region, that impacts oil prices, and that in turn impacts markets in the US and impacts inflation. So no country in the world is immune from that. But the fact that they don't need actual supplies, of course, this enables the US to maybe take policies or take steps that it wouldn't have. But it doesn't mean that it's not getting hurt.
So Amina Bakr at Kepler, he basically said the U.S., doesn't need supply, but it will still get hurt. So I'm wondering right now, should the situation stay the way it is or even get worse as gas prices perhaps go even higher, will President Trump or the U.S. consider a more political model, that shields Americans from high gas prices the way it sometimes is done here, this part of the world? We're talking about, obviously, price controls. We're talking about subsidies. Is that something that's even in play or even being considered at this time, Toni?
It's very, very unlikely that the U.S. would implement any sort of price controls. They tried to do this. They did this during those oil shocks of the 1970s, starting with the Nixon administration, and it was absolutely disastrous for the U.S. It led to these massive shortages. We had these long queues at petrol stations. There were imbalances and inefficiencies in the economy. It just doesn't work for the U.S. economic model. And President Trump doesn't actually seem inclined towards price controls anyway. For one thing, it would really tick off the oil industry, which is set to make tens of billions of dollars off these higher oil prices. And Trump is quite friendly with oil executives, and he's been putting a lot of pressure on them to invest heavily in Venezuela. So he does not want to get on their bad side. The president, though, has also really tried to downplay the impact of these higher energy prices. He says that it's a small price to pay for long-term security. He says that the price rises that we have seen at the pump are actually much less than he expected. And he says that prices are really going to drop like a rock once this war ends. Now, experts, of course, are disputing this. I spoke to one recently who said that he expects oil prices to remain elevated at around, $70, $80 a barrel well into 2027 because of the infrastructure damage that has been done during this bombing campaign. On the question of subsidies, perhaps. I mean, if prices really go a lot higher, if they are sustained at this higher rate going into the November midterm elections, then perhaps President Trump would do something like send out checks to families. This is something that he has floated for other issues like tariffs. But that would really spike inflation, which is already set to be much higher because of the higher oil prices, which then feeds in, of course, to what the U.S. central bank is going to do in terms of interest rates.
Roland, there are some who believe that China is the potential winner here, in this region, which is highly dependent on oil, and gas from the Middle East. I'm wondering, how might Beijing, use this energy crisis, which the Americans created, of course, to build a more favorable environment for, its own interests, whether it's economic or whether it's military in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, China's opportunity is not mainly as a fuel superpower. It is actually the industrial and strategic supplier of new fuels. I mean, first of all, Beijing can present itself as a country that saw this coming. I mean, President Xi Jinping now openly urging the faster development of new energy systems, stressing wind, solar, hydropower, nuclear, diversify energy security, basically. And that's the message for the region, that if you want less exposure to the Middle East turmoil, electrify faster, and China can sell you the kit to do it. I mean, there was a recent Johns Hopkins report that said that Chinese companies have pledged more than $227 billion to build EVs, chargers, batteries in other countries with clean technology. And let's not forget, over the past 10 years, China has electrified huge portions of its transportation and industrial sectors, and that's cut oil consumption by up to 1 billion barrels of oil today. And that's a good cushion to have right now with the disruptions at the Strait of Hormuz. And secondly, I mean, China already benefits because it dominates large parts of the clean tech supply chain. I mean, investors betting on the war in Iran will boost the demand for Chinese renewables and related exports. I mean, Chinese green stocks have jumped on speculation of stronger overseas demand. The fuel shock has already boosted, say, EV interest across Asia-Pacific shares, and that's boosted shares of car makers like BYD. So, Beijing can use this diplomatically in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. It can offer up renewable options or financing as a form of energy security partnership. And that's a very much softer influence than oil, but still potentially very powerful.
The New York Times, Toni, is saying that this energy crisis is accelerating a return to nuclear power in the US, but also in Asia and Europe. So I'm wondering, first of all, you, Toni, in what tangible ways are you seeing this? Is it happening?
Well, the U.S. government had already started to shift its focus to nuclear energy before this war started. And this was because American households were really under pressure from soaring electricity costs on the back of this massive expansion of AI data centers in the U.S. They consume an enormous amount of energy. So that was driving up the electricity prices. So President Trump signed a number of executive orders last year to accelerate and expand the development of nuclear energy. The aim of the administration is to quadruple nuclear power production by 2050. And to get there, the administration is doing things like streamlining the regulatory process for new reactor approvals, providing billions of dollars for research, particularly when it comes to those small modular reactors, which are the cheaper, more nimble, easier to deploy type of reactors. They've authorized the construction of new reactors on federal lands, and it is really trying to restart existing but shut down plants. So, for example, the administration has given $1 billion to Constellation Energy to restart 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania, which back in 1979 was the site of the U.S.'s worst commercial nuclear accident in history. Critics have really raised concerns that all of this is happening way too quickly and at a time when the Trump administration has loosened the nuclear regulations to speed up the development of these reactors. So we've seen safety rules that have been rewritten, environmental reviews that have been reduced, security inspections that have been weakened, and there are concerns that this could have catastrophic catastrophic consequences in the future.
Roland, what's happening in this part of the world?
Yeah, I think in Asia, Japan is the clearest case. I mean, Japanese politicians are now openly arguing for all available nuclear reactors to offset the Iran crisis. And only 15 of Japan's 33 operable reactors have restarted so far. So 9 more are actually seeking approval. And public and political resistance has also softened as compared to years following the Fukushima nuclear disaster. In Europe, we can also see that both in rhetoric and in planning. I mean, we had European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that had called Europe's earlier reduction in nuclear power a strategic mistake. She said that last month. And France, it's also pressing ahead with plans to build 6 new reactors through state utility company EDF. So even the EU is scrutinizing this state aid. And that tells us that nuclear power right now is being reframed as energy security and not just a climate policy.
Understood. I want to stay with you, Roland, because right now in Asia, and perhaps it's the same case for other parts of the world as well, the approach is to conserve, cut down usage, by citizens, find alternative supplies if that's available, and then draw on reserves, where that's applicable. Not every country has reserves. I'm wondering when the dust, finally settles. I mean, what do you see emerging? I mean, as this region, moves, we were talking about this earlier as well, moves to secure its energy security?
I think Asia will move in all directions at the same time. I mean, we are right now seeing more diversification of fossil fuel supply, so more storage, looking for more strategic reserves, looking for more alternative import routes, as well as because of that anxiety at the choke points like Hormuz. Secondly, I think coal and gas insurance will be the short-term go-to. I mean, we're already seeing that. Japan, as I mentioned, relaxing its coal rules. Bangladesh, cutting demand because imported fuel costs are hurting them. Third, of course, that's going to be a faster push into electrification and domestic renewables. I think this is where the long-term answer lies. I mean, Pakistan is a great story about that pivot towards clean energy. Remember, following that Russian invasion of Ukraine, it was hit hard by the energy shock. It was unable to afford exorbitant LNG imports. So there was then, after that, a deluge of inexpensive solar panels from China, and then it also invested in hydropower, even coal, and that's actually reduced its vulnerability on LNG. Today, solar power accounts for nearly 30% of all its electricity. Now, 5 years back, it was only 3%. So 3 to 30 in 5 years is an example, really, for the rest of the region and where renewables could go. And fourthly, I think there's going to be more industrial policy. What I mean by that is countries will not only be asking about buying energy more safely, they'll also be asking to build more hardware themselves, whether it's solar panels, battery storage, grid gear, and even small reactors over time. So hopefully, I think the lessons from past crises will have to be relearned, and that is for Asia's future energy strategy, there's going to be more insurance in the old system, but also a faster investment in the new ones.
And Toni, what picture is going to emerge from the U.S. once the ships sail home and U.S. forces, leave the region and the war ends?
Well, I think under the Trump administration, it's pretty obvious that the primary strategy is to double down on maximizing domestic production, oil, LNG, drilling. The Trump administration has, on the edges, tried to reduce costs. It has lifted sanctions on Russia. It has lifted sanctions on Iranian oil that's already at sea. It's granting these Jones Act waivers, which is allowing foreign flagged ships carrying oil to dock at U.S. ports. It's releasing oil from the strategic reserve. But experts say, all of these efforts are going to have very little impact, really only on the margins. oil is a global commodity. Its prices are set in the global market. So as long as this war is going on or the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, the U.S. will be impacted despite being this energy exporter. Renewables, on the other hand, are almost completely energy independent. They're not tied or dependent on other countries, maybe for the hardware, or maybe for the software as well. But the U.S. is pretty independent when it comes to that type of manufacturing. But that is not the direction that this administration seems to want to go in. So I think if we're going to see any sort of future diversification, it's going to either come from a new administration or new congressional members, or it's going to come from the American public itself. Who decides, we're going to buy the electric vehicles even if we don't have the subsidies. We are going to put the solar panels on our roofs even if we don't have the subsidies.
Toni and Roland, thank you very much. I'm Arnold Gay. Thank you for watching and listening as well. The CNA Correspondent podcast was brought to you by Tiffany Ang, Nat Vettelvero, and Craig Dale. See you next time.